I can pretty much think of two main reasons why a lot of junior investment bankers would love to transition into private equity. And I'm sure you already know the first reason, and that's a higher salary and high bonuses. But the second reason might surprise some of you, and that's to get more control over your schedule. Now, let me just take a step back and explain the lifestyle of an investment banker so you get a better understanding as to why having control is so important. So, as I've already explained in my previous videos, the lifestyle of a junior investment banker can be pretty gruesome. It can be pretty exhausting. And I'm not saying this to be provocative. I'm not saying this to get attention. It's reality. I've been there, and if you know anyone that works in the industry, then you know the lifestyle is pretty long. So as an analyst, you're pretty much working the longest hours out of the whole team. In any week, there is around 168 hours. And after those 168 hours, around 70 to 100 hours, you're pretty much in the office working. Now, whether or not you're actually working every single one of those hours is debatable, because sometimes you could be waiting on commentary, sometimes you could be waiting on other people to give you work. So you might be spending an hour or 2 hours just surfing on Amazon. But the reality is you are working long hours in the office, and that means coming in at 9:30 and leaving around 1:30 in the morning or 2 in the morning. And pretty much you go in when it's dark and you leave when it's dark. And that's pretty much the story of every single analyst and associate. But what is surprising is that it's not necessarily the long hours which is grueling or what burns candidates out. It's the fact that you don't have control over your working hours. So at any moment in time, when you're a junior investment banker, you could pretty much be called into the office because there's a last minute change to the financial model, or the client needs something, or there's something about the deal, or specific buyers want access to certain things, and you have to be there to action it off. And as a junior investment banker, it's your responsibility to do that. But what you soon realize is you're not the only one in the office at those unsociable hours. There are other people in the office around 11 a.m., 1 a.m. So you do get used to it. You do make friends with other analysts, with other associates who are in the same position as you. And you do build that camaraderie eventually. And so it's not that bad. Don't get me wrong, it's still bad, the fact that you have to be in the office until 1 a.m. in the morning, 2 a.m. in the morning. But because there are other people there with you, it's not that bad. You'd be surprised, but the human body can adapt to some of the most severe situations. Now, the one thing that we still cannot get used to is the fact that we have zero control over our schedule. And that means skipping out on social events. That means skipping out on birthdays. That means skipping out on weddings. That means even skipping out on funerals. And it's that lack of control over your schedule that's what burns people out in investment banking. Now, the long hours does contribute to it as well, but it's the lack of control. From my experience and from the bankers that I've spoken to, that's what really burns people out in investment banking. And this is why there is such an appeal for junior bankers to leave investment banking and go into the buy side, where you do have a lot more control over your schedule. Now, don't get me wrong, the hours, especially at the junior level in private equity, is still going to be the same. So whether you're going to be an analyst or an associate in private equity, in the first few years, you're pretty much working similar hours to investment banking, to the investment banking analyst and associate. But on the buy side, you do have a lot more control over your schedule. You can schedule parents' evening, you can schedule meet up with your friends, you can schedule a wedding. So you do have a lot more control over your schedule. So that's one of the greatest appeals about going into private equity as a junior investment banker, is the control over your schedule. It's to regain sanity, it's to regain control over your social life. And of course, another reason is the higher salary and the higher bonuses. Now, for those of you that don't know, the world of high finance is broken up into sell side and buy side. Sell side is pretty much investment banking. Buy side is private equity, hedge fund, venture capital. And when you're on the sell side, it's all about deal making. It's all about bringing in and completing as many deals as possible and collecting your commission. Now, on the buy side, this is when you're actually taking on risk. Because you have a limited amount of capital to invest, you have to be very selective, very strategic on the types of deals you invest in. So you have a lot more risk, you have a lot more skin in the game. And as a result, you get higher bonuses, higher salaries. And this is why people do transition into the buy side, because there's a lot more money as well. And there are other reasons why people do go into private equity. For example, some candidates join investment banking for the sole reason of exiting into private equity eventually after they get enough experience, after they get enough exposure. It's always been their goal to go into private equity. Some candidates, they just have an eye for investments and they realize that whilst on their training contract in investment banking. And a natural transition is of course to go into private equity. So there are a few other reasons why people go into private equity, but the main two reasons is of course to get better control over your schedule, and the salary is of course a lot better. Now, just because junior investment bankers want to break into private equity doesn't actually mean they do break into private equity. You're going to find that a lot of the conversations, especially from junior investment bankers, are going to be about whether or not a specific private equity firm is recruiting, or whether or not they want to leave investment banking to go onto the buy side. So there's a lot of competition for private equity roles. So private equity firms, they do have the pick of the litter. And they of course want specific candidates with specific experience within the area which they operate in. So if a private equity firm operates within the oil and gas sector and they only deal with mature companies, so they're going to want junior candidates within the oil and gas sector and who have experience in dealing with complex financial structures. So in order to break into private equity, you do need to get the right experience, the right exposure to certain deals, and you do need to play a critical role within the due diligence process, within the deal structuring process as well. You do need some exposure to that. And not every junior investment banker gets that. And some private equity firms, they do have preference over certain institutions, over certain education backgrounds, over others. So there's also that to consider as well. If you are interested in breaking into private equity, whether you are a fresh graduate or whether you are an experienced candidate from investment banking or from a different field, then you might want to consider getting the private equity interview and recruitment guide, where we go over the specific questions you should prepare for, as well as get sample answers in order to ace your interviews and learn the whole private equity deal structuring process from A to Z, so you can pretty much stand out from everyone else that's applying into private equity.